Hello everyone, I hope everyone is doing well. So the purpose of today is to talk about two very important processes, meiosis and genetics. So let's go ahead and get started. Have you ever wondered why even though you and your siblings are related, why is it that you guys don't look exactly like each other? Or perhaps you notice that you have certain traits like your mom or certain traits like your dad. However, you don't look exactly like either of them. The reason for this is because of meiosis, and we'll talk in detail about meiosis. Or perhaps when you go see a doctor, the doctor begins to ask you questions. Questions such as if any of your family members suffers from a specific disease or condition. Let's say Alzheimer's or cancer, for an example. Why do they ask you these questions? Well, the reason for this is because there are certain mutations that can actually be passed on from the parent to the offspring. Specifically, mutations that occur on very specialized cells that we call gametes, or the egg or sperm. So if there is a mutation that happens on the egg or sperm, there is a probability that those mutations can actually be passed on from the mother to the offspring. In this chapter, we're going to be focusing our attention in a disease that is called cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease that is caused by mutations in the nucleotide sequence. The most common type of mutation is a deletion of the amino acid phenylalanine. Essentially, what we're doing here is that we are changing the shape or structure of the protein. And anytime you change the shape or the structure of a protein, you're basically changing the actual function of that specific protein. In this case, we're changing the structure of the cystic fibrosis transmembrane conductance regulator. So the function of this protein is to move ions in and out of the cell. Specifically, we're talking about chloride ions. And one of the things that happen with individuals who suffer from cystic fibrosis is that there is an accumulation of mucus in the lungs. And eventually, that leads to bacterial infections. So one of the things that individuals with cystic fibrosis, what they have to do is they have to take a cocktail of medication. And some of the medication is aimed at fighting bacterial infections. We as humans, we are considered diploid organisms, which means that we have two copies of each chromosome. So in this case, in the case of humans, we actually have 23 pairs of chromosomes, or a total of 46 chromosomes. So that means that we have two copies of chromosome 1, two copies of chromosome 2, two copies of chromosome 3, and so on and so forth. The term that we use in science is homologous chromosomes. Now, here is some important information when it comes to homologous chromosomes. Homologous chromosomes, they're identical when it comes to the shape, they're identical when it comes to the size, they're identical when it comes to the genes. However, homologous chromosomes may have different alleles. But what are alleles? Let's start by talking about genes. A gene is a segment of DNA that has the instructions to make a specific protein. Within this segment of DNA, you can have some small differences. These differences in DNA is what we call alleles. These small differences is what gives people different characteristics. For example, eye color. In this case, let's say, for example, blue eyes versus brown eyes. A way to think about this is to think about ice cream flavors. You can have vanilla, you can have chocolate, you can have pistachio. Even though there are different flavors of ice cream, at the end of the day, they all are classified as ice cream. Here are two very important terms that we must know: genotype and phenotype. When you hear the term genotype, doesn't that sound to you like genes. So genotype, it's the DNA. You cannot actually see DNA without the help of very expensive microscope. On the other hand, phenotype is what you can actually see, what you can actually measure. A good way to think about phenotype is your looks. Think about your looks. Okay? So let me give you an example of a phenotype. If we're talking about eye color, we're going to be talking about, for example, like blue eyes or brown eyes. You can actually see that. Okay? Now, the genotype determines the phenotype of the individual. Have you ever wondered who gave you your looks? Who gave you your characteristics? So your looks or characteristics were given to you by your parents. So whenever your parents wanted to make the most beautiful, the most amazing, the best organism in the world, each of them provided very specialized cells, the egg and sperm. So the egg was provided by your mom, and the sperm was provided by your dad. Each of those cells have half the number of chromosomes. So both of those cells fuse together until they form a cell that have just the right number of chromosomes. In the case of human, 46 chromosomes. This cell began to divide until it had 2 cells, until it had 4 cells, until it had 8 cells, 16, 32, 64, until eventually you were just a mass of cells. So these cells began to communicate with each other until eventually they form you. So gametes are specialized cells that have half the number of chromosomes. So in this case, we're talking about the egg and sperm. These gametes were made during meiosis. And in the next slides, we're going to be talking about meiosis. Alright, so I'm going to start by talking about interphase. So in this case, I have drawn a cell with 4 chromosomes. I have drawn each of those chromosomes in different colors for a very important reason. So in this case, we have homologous chromosomes, and if you guys remember, homologous chromosomes are identical when it comes to the shape, are identical when it comes to the size. They have the same genes, or they may have different alleles, and this is why I have drawn them of different colors. So here we have the parent cell that has 4 chromosomes. So the first thing that happens is that this cell gets a signal from the body that says we need to make more cells. So in this case, we're talking about making the gametes, or the egg or sperm. So what happens to the G1 phase is that the cell makes more organelles, and it also makes more cytoplasm. Once this cell makes more organelles in the cytoplasm, then it's going to go on to the next phase of interphase. In this case, it's the S phase. So what happens during the S phase, it's that we make more DNA. So each of those chromosomes are replicated. So if you see, they look like X's. So one thing about those chromosomes is that they join together in the middle, through the centromere. So after we have duplicated the chromosomes, then we're going to go on to the next phase. So in this case, is the G2 phase. So during the G2 phase, the cell makes proteins that are necessary for meiosis. The other thing that happens during the G2 phase is the cell grows in size.